Welcome to this is our 7th webinar on working with people with congenital deafblindness in the NDIS. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting all around Australia. I'm aware we've got people from a few different states, so we pay our respect to the elders past, present and emerging of wherever you are based at the moment. And we've got 4 great presenters this evening to speak to you. Emily Shepherd, who is a parent and founding member of Usher Kids Australia. We have Melanie Robertson, who's a speech pathologist, senior speech pathologist and deafblind consultant with Senses Australia. Emily Macdonald, who is also a deafblind consultant and occupational therapist with Senses Australia. And Ryan Malonda, who works for the National Disability Insurance Agency. So we'll get started right away. Please do type in the chat if you've got a technology issue, and we'll try and help you to make sure you can hear and see everything. And I'll hand over to Emily Shepherd to give her perspective on the parent journey in the NDIS process.
There you go. Thank you, Meredith. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for having me, Meredith and Michelle. I really appreciate being a part of this webinar tonight. So I have a 10-year-old son who has type 1 Usher syndrome. He was born with a profound hearing loss and wears cochlear implants. He has some vestibular dysfunction, as well as the degenerative eye disease, retinitis pigmentosa. He currently has night blindness and a peripheral vision loss, and we can see that that is gradually degenerating each year. NDIS-wise, we've just finished up our 2nd year on the NDIS. Before this, he didn't have any funding for supports other than those that were provided through the Medicare care plans. He did receive, when he was a young child, access to the Better Start funding for children with a disability, but this ceased when he turned 6. So the NDIS came to us as a real welcome relief financially for our family. We were able to receive funding for his therapies, and he sees a range of different therapists. He sees physiotherapy, he has physiotherapy, speech therapy, occupational therapy, orientation and mobility therapy, and he sees a psychologist on top of a wide range of medical specialists as well. So the NDIS are able to help us financially with seeing all of those therapists. But another benefit is that we're able to receive this therapy in a really flexible way. Therapists were able to visit us in the home rather than in a clinic. They're able to visit us at school, and this makes a really huge difference for our family. My son doesn't moan and groan about sitting in a waiting room. Instead, he's able to play in his own environment where he's felt like it's a little bit more on his terms. This really helps build the relationship between himself and the therapist. And I think that that has made the therapy more successful as well. Yeah, so that's the benefits and rewards for our NDIS therapy. We also use some of our funding for therapy assistance. So a support worker works under the guidance of our occupational therapists or physiotherapists. We work on goals in our plan for the year, and we work towards those goals with the therapy assistant, and they are able to incorporate that into some really fun activities. So what my son thinks is rock climbing or stand-up paddleboarding or playing football with a support worker is really a dedicated plan to build his core balance, for example, coordination skills to help him with his vestibular stuff. So he is really able to engage in his community, make meaningful relationships, without the term therapy, really. So it's really had a really engaging, wonderful experience for our family. We're also able to use our NDIS to help us with community participation. So we've used our funds to work with his local sporting clubs, with his coach. We're able to let them know his specific needs and challenges. And this has allowed us to make sure that all of those environments are firstly safe for him, but he's able to participate the same way as any other kids his age are. And really this has been life-changing, because sports in the past had been really challenging for him, and many, because of his disability, he would have had to stop. But now with that support from the NDIS, we're able to really broaden the wider community's understanding of disability and deafblindness, and make that a more accepting place for him and others. So my work at Usher Kids Australia, we have about 40 kids across Australia now who are all on NDIS plans. And some of the positive experiences we have heard from them really are about giving kids the chance to participate in things that they wouldn't have had the opportunity beforehand. Again, this comes down to things just being too difficult. They don't understand the hearing loss, they don't understand the vision loss, they're not willing to put in the work. But now with the NDIS funds, the children are allowed to, work on their goals, find what really interests them, and work with their NDIS specialists to be able to incorporate that into groups being more really accepting and accommodating to our children with a disability. In regards to some key services for participants to consider, and this is really for children up to 18 years old. It might be early intervention, orientation and mobility services, community participation, so assisting our kids and our teens to really develop those social skills that will be really important to them going into the workforce later on. Getting them job skill ready, mentoring programs, but it depends on the individual goals of the child and making the right accommodations to make this all happen. Equipment, so there's lots of equipment that might be able to help children and teens in regards to particularly safety, and this is really about flashing or vibrating smoke alarms, or recreational things, which is very popular in our house, is our TV streamer. So my son is able to stream the TV through his cochlear implants without disturbing noise levels for the rest of the family. One last point I just wanted to make before I finish up and pass back to Meredith. I think it's really important for participants to ensure on their NDIS plan that their primary disability is stated as deafblindness rather than either hearing loss or vision loss with sub disabilities. And not all of our participants have been successful in doing this. But I think that this is really important to ensure that our participants have less complications with the various services that might be requiring. But I'm sure that our NDIS team member will be able to elaborate a little bit more on that and just how important it is to get that primary disability correct in the first place. That's all from me. I'll pass it back to Meredith now. But if anyone has questions, I'll be here at the end when we open it up to question time, or you can email me on emily@usherkidsaustralia.com, and I'm more than happy to do whatever I can to help anyone who has any questions. But thanks so much for having me, and I'll pass back to Meredith.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was fantastic, and it's great to hear what a positive experience it's been for you and your son. So we will, I should have said at the start that we will have just some questions after each speaker if anyone's got questions, but then we'll come back at the end as well for a broader discussion. So if you do have a question for Emily, we want you to use the raise hand function if you want to voice or sign your question, or you can type it in the chat and Michelle will read it out. So if you have a question for Emily, just raise your hand and Michelle will unmute you, or you can type it in the chat. So the raise hand is usually at the bottom if you open up the chat or the participants area.
Oh, we have one from Wilhelmina Brass, Meredith.
So Wilma's got her hand raised?
Yes,
Yes.
I just lowered it down.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead,
Okay.
Wilma.
I just wanted to know how old is Michelle's son with the usher one? Emily's son, sorry.
Sorry.
Emily, I think Emily said 10 years.
10 years old now, right. That's all for me. Thanks.
Thanks, Wilma. Oh, sorry. I think we need to keep Emily still unmuted to answer any questions.
Sorry, it just keeps flicking back to muted, even though I'm unmuting it. Sorry, but it's just, that's what's happening. That we're trying to do it.
Okay, sorry. Thanks, Michelle. And I hope I heard and remembered correctly that he is 10, but hopefully we'll get, oh yeah, it looks like you're unmuted now. Emily, is that right, that your son is 10?
My son is 10, yes. Thanks, Wilma. I can also see a question from Carla. Mm-hmm. No, we didn't actually have a senior planner. We had our local area coordinator work with us on our plan. One of the benefits was that she actually has Usher syndrome, so she had a really good understanding of the conditions and the needs for a child of my son's age. But I would absolutely recommend that people ask for a senior planner so that there's someone with really good understanding of the needs of the deafblind community.
Meredith speaking. I think that is a really good point. Are there any other questions for Emily at this point? And just remembering we'll have some time at the end if you think of something later.
Ryan has a question. He's typed in, that's wonderful, you had a great experience. I missed you where you are from or based.
I'm based in Bayside area in Melbourne, and we go to the Heatherton Brotherhood of St Lawrence for our planning reviews in Heatherton. Yeah. No worries.
I'll leave it open another moment, just see if there's any more hands up or typed questions. No, okay. Well, thank you so much, Emily. I'm sure we'll like to hear from you a bit more at the end. But we'll hand now over to Melanie Robertson, who is going to talk about the pre-planning process and things to consider going into a plan or into a review. Thanks, Melanie.
This is really... Sorry, Melanie, it's just...
Okay. Yep, I've been muted. Okay, so I will say that again. Thank you, Meredith, and thank you, Emily Shepherd, for those really interesting insights into your planning experience. And I'm really glad that, you know, they're on the whole, they're really positive outcomes for you. So I'm going to be talking about what it is, what we mean by goals and what goals might look like in an NDIS plan for a child with congenital deafblindness or a person who's grown up now and was born with deafblindness. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to assume that it's a family that's listening. And they're listening in terms of planning for their child, but I understand the situations will be different, and we have a few therapists on board as well, so there will be questions to a segment for questions after this slot anyway. So I'm a speech pathologist and deafblind consultant at Sense Australia. I'm going to sort of start with, so when we talk NDIS, people sort of start immediately using the word goals and kind of assuming that everyone knows what they mean by goals, but that's not always the case. The goals is not really a word we use much in everyday life. When we're thinking about growing up, thinking about getting on with life, being part of our community that we live in. And when the NDIS planner writes your goals on your plan, they're not referring to kicking a ball between two poles or throwing it into the net. So I wanted to break this idea of what a goal is down a little bit more. So whatever services and equipment you can fund using your NDIS plan will be determined by what it is that you want for your child, what they want for themselves, what theirs or your concerns are, and what you and professional assessment can tell the NDIA about your child's development, sensory status, involvement in life experiences and as part of their family, their childcare, their school, or other part of the community. So the NDIS uses the term goals when talking about these ideas and may discuss goals right now, that you want right now, and also for what you might want in the longer term and aspirations that you might have in the longer term as well. So when you think about, well, what are my goals? It might be helpful if you ask yourself these questions. What skills does your child need to learn as they grow up? Do they need help to get better at doing some things? What places do they need to go? Can they get there? How will they get there? When they are there, can they see, hear, feel, or understand what they need to? What groups do they want to belong to, or activities do they want to participate in? What kind of relationships or connections to people do you want them to have, or do they want? Do we, as a family, have the information and skills to understand the disability and help our child? Do we need guidance with this? So when you have your answer to these sort of questions, they can be made into general goals about independence, doing things, your child doing things for themselves, communicating, participating in life and the community, all broad enough to encompass all the services and supports and equipment you might need to work towards those goals. So I've brought out some examples of these broad goals, and you, when you're working with your service providers, then may actually narrow them down to what that might look like in regard to what exact service that provider is going to provide you. But at the NDIS stage, they're quite broad. And that's probably a good thing because it allows you to be quite flexible and pull in all the services and equipment kind of access that you might need to get there. So, some examples. I might want to participate in activities that I enjoy. I might want to develop movement skills to increase confidence and participate safely in activities. I might want to develop independent skills to do things for myself and communicate and socialise with others. I might want to be safe when I'm in the community or at home. I might want to meet new people and be supported with my communication when doing this. I might want physical, emotional and mental well-being. Deafblindness certainly brings challenges in all those areas. Your NDIS planner might also want to talk about some shorter term goals or more specific goals as well, but definitely your service providers will. If you would like, as we go along, you might put in some examples in the chat of maybe some example of goals that you have put in your plan. And that would be perhaps useful for our audience. The funding to help you achieve your goals falls under several different areas in the plan because sometimes you'll need different people, services and equipment to achieve them. Take a goal about communicating and socialising. We often come across very unique communication styles and methods in deafblindness. You can use a therapy team and deafblind consultants to find out about these and learn new ways of communicating with your child. As the skills are so specialised, you may need the services of someone proficient in signing, for example, to help the family learn Auslan, for example. You might also need to learn how to modify the sign language so your child can see it better, or if needed, feel the sign language instead. If the sensory status of the child changes, then those communication methods might have to adapt as they grow and change. If your child, another example, if your child is signing or learning to sign, they might need someone to be a bridge to the non-signing people in informal and social occasions. You might get funding and course supports to fund someone with these skills to help your child socialise and communicate in the community. Your child's diagnosis may mean they need help to equipment. So the plan might include therapy with this, and equipment needs that a specialist needs to design or help you choose. And you would get funding under the capacity building, improved daily living category, and capital supports to pay for the equipment. They may need other higher cost equipment such as hearing and vision aids. Other equipment of low cost that helps you get things done, supports learning of new skills, covers disability related expenses can be provided under core supports. For a person with deaf blindness, this might include hearing device batteries, a cup, plate or bottle, liquid thickeners to make drinks safe for swallowing, continence products, a magnifier to make things easier to see, or items to support communication. Core supports are also needed to fund a communication guide and interpreting and note-taking services. So up next is Emily Macdonald, who explains some of the services and supports that I've mentioned in more detail. But for now, we will pause for questions about NDIS goals.
It's Meredith speaking. Thank you for that, Melanie. That was fantastic, and I'm sure has given people a lot to think about. Rodney's just noted that the background of the interpreting is very bright, so I do apologise. We did look into doing what we could there, and hopefully perhaps you can follow the captions. So does anybody have any questions for Emily? Again, you can raise your hand or type your question in the chat. I can see Erica has typed that peer support is important and that mixing with other people who are deaf-blind and understand the support is very important. So that's definitely, I think, for people to mix and have that peer support. If that's something that they're wanting, then yes, definitely looking at how you would facilitate that.
Yeah. And I think, you know, the NDIS gives you that flexibility to be so personalised. So if that's important to you, then you can put that in your plan. And I think Emily Shepherd mentioned mentoring, and also, yeah, the communication guide. And Emily Macdonald will talk about more about, you know, core supports and getting that sort of service in, accessing that sort of service.
It's Meredith, Melanie, and I see Ryan has typed a question. What would you say is the most challenging in terms of goal writing? How can planners, LAC and LAC support participants better in goal setting and plan writing?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure it has an easy answer. I guess that those sort of questions that I, you know, kind of give people as homework, that I sort of went through to help them define, you know, what is important, where do they want to be. They don't necessarily know how to have to get there, but the planner can help sort of, or if they don't know how to link in with the supports they need, they can get, you know, maybe a support coordinator, specialist support coordinator, which Emily Macdonald is going to talk about, to help them link up with services. But you often find if people are unsure, then maybe that might be part of the process of their services, is starting with some really broad goals, but narrowing it down in the therapy process or whatever services they're accessing. So I think from an NDIS point of view, if we get a nice broad overarching goal, and until you know sort of sum's a really generous package, because deaf blindness often comes with a really, really high and complicated need, and requires, you know, kind of quite specialised supports. So a broad goal, a generous package, and people will find their way.
Carla and Michelle again. Carla Anderson has stated, wondering about the pre-planning process. Is there a time limit for this, and how many meetings can be held prior to the actual planning meeting? And that's from Carla.
This might potentially be a question for Ryan in his segment. Not too sure. Yeah, it's happy to take that, because it will depend also whether you're already in services, or whether you're new to services in general, and who's going to help you with that pre-planning process, whether it's your existing services or you're actually given a package to help plan and then get another package sort of a short while later for the actual services, for goals. Yeah. Does that sound kind of accurate, Ryan? Or are you happy to look at that question more?
It's Meredith speaking. I think we'll move on to Emily, and I think perhaps it would be good if that's the first question we ask Ryan when we get to Ryan. So thank you so much for your time, Melanie. We'll have you back on at the end for to answer any questions that come through once we've heard from everybody. So thank you. We'll hear now from Emily Macdonald, who is going to talk about potential therapies, supports and equipment that are particularly relevant for people with congenital deafblindness.
Hi everyone, my name is Emily Macdonald and I am a deafblind consultant and occupational therapist at Senses in Perth. Today I will be discussing the supports you can access using your NDIS funding, specifically for people who are deafblind. Under capacity building supports, you may receive funding for a few different titles, either called improved daily living or improved relationships, and there's a few others, but they're the kind of two key ones, which can be used to fund therapy intervention. The therapy team for an individual who is deafblind might be slightly different to other people accessing the NDIS due to the complex nature of the disability and the need for a specialised team. When you're looking for a provider of therapy services, it's important to think about whether the provider you are considering can meet your needs, or whether it would be more appropriate to engage multiple agencies with the support of a specialist support coordinator to make sure that you get what you need. A specialist support coordinator is funded when there are additional high or complex needs and will be a qualified and experienced practitioner, such as an occupational therapist, a psychologist or a social worker. A deafblind therapy team may include generic therapy supports, that is, therapy supports that are easy to find and more generalist in nature. These professionals include a physiotherapist who can help the individual to understand the physical world around them, which may involve stretches, strengthening and gaining early physical milestones. Also, inner ear abnormalities are common in diagnosis such as Charge and Usher's syndrome. This may include experiencing dizziness, vertigo and disequilibrium. A physiotherapist can provide direct treatment and exercise to improve these symptoms. An occupational therapist, or OT, whose role is to help people to do all the things they want to do or need to do in their daily lives, but can't because of illness, injury, or disability. This can include completing a functional assessment of daily life to identify strengths and challenges, recommending helpful pieces of equipment that may make life easier and safer, which can include things like wheelchairs, alerting devices like the Bellman system, video magnifiers, or falls detection devices, depending on what the individual needs, and developing new skills and compensatory strategies. An OT can also have valuable input into a positive behaviour support plan if this is needed. A speech pathologist can assess communication skills and determine best modalities for communication. A speech pathologist with specialist training in dysphagia can also assess eating, drinking, and swallowing skills to ensure mealtimes are safe and enjoyable. This may involve adjusting positioning, modifying textures of food and drink, or using specific equipment at mealtimes. A speech pathologist is also a key member of the team when developing a positive behaviour support plan. A social worker can work with individuals, families, and with the community to address inequalities, empower individuals, and address systematic barriers faced by individuals with deafblindness and their families. A psychologist can support the emotional needs of the individual. A psychologist can assess, diagnose, and treat the psychological problems and behavioural dysfunctions resulting from or related to physical and mental health. They can also provide valuable input into a positive behaviour support plan, and they play a key role in improving the individual's quality of life. For individuals who require nutritional support or there are concerns around their eating and drinking, a dietitian might also be involved. So they're the kind of generalist health professionals that are quite easy to find. And then there are more specific supports provided by allied health professionals with specific training and skills working in the field of sensory disability, which might be more specific to somebody who is deafblind. These include an orthoptist. An orthoptist can undertake a functional vision assessment. This is not an eye health test, which may be conducted by an optometrist or an ophthalmologist. This is an assessment of visual function, which is what you are able to see and under what conditions. This typically involves assessing all aspects of visual function, such as distance and near vision, whether your eyes are aligned, whether you require things in high contrast, if you have troubles with depth perception and colour vision. The orthoptist can then recommend low vision aids, which can assist the person to maximise their vision and give them access to visual information which may otherwise be outside their field of vision. The results of a functional vision assessment conducted by an orthoptist can also be helpful to other health professionals, such as the OT, who may be helping with other tasks such as cooking, where it's really important to know the person's visual function to make sure they are safe. An audiologist is somebody who's not typically part of a community-based therapy team, but they're still a very important member of the support team. Audiologists can provide diagnostic tests to understand your hearing and auditory function. They can also provide rehabilitation and habilitation, which may include fitting of hearing aids and other assistive devices like FM receivers and TV listeners. An orientation and mobility specialist might also be involved. They're commonly known as O&M specialists. They can work with people to develop skills and strategies they can use to know where they are, both inside and outside, and to move from one place to another safely, confidently, and independently. O&Ms work with people throughout all stages of their life and on whatever mobility goals they would like to work on. This can also include teaching someone how to use a mobility aid, such as a cane, or using apps or technology that may assist with mobility. If you require an Auslan interpreter, they should be present throughout all of your therapy sessions. If your therapists have not worked with an Auslan interpreter before, you may need to provide them with some guidance about what you would like this support to look like to ensure clear communication throughout your therapy sessions. Auslan Interpreting is funded through your core budget in your NDIS plan, so separately to therapy. An Auslan interpreter interprets spoken English to Auslan and Auslan to spoken English for the deaf and deafblind community. An Auslan interpreter with experience working in the deafblind community will be familiar with modifications needed to ensure Auslan is accessible. This may include close range signing, visual frame signing, tactile signing, and deafblind finger spelling. Social haptic communication may also be used. This is a way of communicating information in a tactile way onto the body of another person. An Auslan interpreter should always be booked for formal appointments and meetings, including therapy sessions, where this level of communication support is required. A communication guide is different to an Auslan interpreter. A communication guide can provide some level of communication support to people with deafblindness. However, they are not typically trained and accredited as Auslan interpreters. A communication guide is also funded through your core budget in your NDIS plan. The last member of a deafblind team that I would like to discuss is a deafblind consultant. A deafblind consultant is an allied health professional or a teacher who has gone on to do additional study or work in the specialised area of deafblindness over a number of years. As a result of this additional training and skill development, deafblind consultants have a deep and broad knowledge of potential issues faced by people with deafblindness and some of the systems, strategies, and supports available to address these issues. A deafblind consultant will assess the skills and needs of the individual with a particular focus on communication, mobility, and the need for assistive technology. Following this assessment, deafblind consultants work with individuals and their networks to develop skills and strategies which will support their everyday life. This may include referrals to relevant allied health professionals as appropriate. Deafblind consultants have a role in linking people with deafblindness with relevant networks, such as local deafblind social groups, diagnosis-specific support groups like Usher Kids, and wider national and international support groups. Deafblind consultants can provide support when accessing education, employment, and the wider community by providing support to the individual and their support networks about how to access various places and events. They can also run training to build the skills of the service providers and wider community to meet the needs of the individual. A deafblind consultant helps to bridge the gap between people with deafblindness and the services and systems around them to make sure they can access services and supports as equally as everybody else. I'm going to hand back to Meredith now, but if you have any questions or if you'd like to chat about anything from the presentation, please feel free to get in contact.
Thank you so much, Emily. That's a lot to give everyone to think about, I think. Michelle, I see there's a comment from Emily Shepherd.
Yes, Emily has written, I think the compounding impact of a dual sensory loss is underestimated, and providing support for hearing loss plus support for vision loss are just not enough. Specialists such as deafblind consultants are an integral to the process to allow a real understanding of the impact of deafblindness on young children and adults.
Thank you, Emily. That's Meredith speaking. That's great to hear a parent advocating for the need for deafblind consultancy input. So are there any other questions or comments for Emily?
Carol has her hand up.
Yeah, sorry. Carla's just put her message in and it just says, I have been hearing the term therapy assistant. Can someone please explain the role? How is this different from a communication guide?
It's Meredith speaking, so I'll hand that question to Emily, and then we'll get Carol to share her screen to ask her question.
Yep.
So a therapy assistant is somebody who has been trained in, has gone to TAFE and done a certificate in therapy assistant, or they might be a allied health student at university. They don't necessarily have the same skill set as a comm guide because they might not be Auslan proficient or have undergone sighted guide training. So they have a different set of skills to a comm guide.
And now, Michelle, can you, is Carol's video shown?
I'm just going to...
Perhaps if the interpreter can see Carol to voice for Carol.
Let me just find Carol.
Yeah.
I've got Meredith, Katya, Melissa, Deborah, Janice,
Carol Brown.
Carol, there we are.
Zoom meeting, standard window.
Yep, okay, go ahead.
There's a man there, the interpreter. She's talking about being bright behind. Yeah. She's just talking about the background behind the interpreters being too bright. And then the other room was better where it was darker. Yeah.
It's Meredith speaking. Carol, we did try that.
Some dialogue.
Distancing, we needed to be in a different room and there wasn't time to set up the dark background, but we apologise. We are aware it's a problem. So thank you for the feedback.
Zoom meeting,
not an issue.
standard window.
Deborah has her hand up as well.
Okay, can you unmute Deborah?
Sorry,
I just recently got my video magnifier. Is it possible to have some training with the orthotis or with the Deafblind?
Show subtitle, view full transcript, menu item. 18 hours, 44 minutes and 20 seconds. Transcript,
Michelle,
standard window, close button.
sorry.
Meredith Crane, Carol, we did try that but. Search text field.
Sorry, it just doesn't seem to want to work.
Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Sorry.
That's okay. There seems to be a bit of a lag. So was there a question that came through after about the...
So, sorry, did you hear Deborah's question?
Sorry, that's right, Deb. Yes. So,
Do you want me to repeat the question again?
Yes, please. Sorry.
The question is, I just recently got my video magnifier and I'm just wondering, is it possible if I had some training from the orthotis or my Deafblind consultant or a support worker can help learn how to use the buttons on the machine? Thank you.
Hey Deb, it's Emily speaking. Absolutely, that would be something that your Deafblind consultant or your OT could help you out with.
Okay.
it's Meredith speaking, so something to follow up after this session. So thank you very much for your time.
Or can I use my OT to answer those sort of questions?
Yes.
To Emily, I'm asking.
Yes, you can, Deb, yes.
So I'll ask my OT those sort of questions.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Emily, and have a good day and stay safe and keep your social distancing. Thank you.
There is another question from Shane. He's put, how to identify and locate specialists in your region?
Meredith speaking. Did you want to answer that, Emily? Or
can we do a team answer?
Sure.
Where do you live, Shane? That's a point to start with, I think.
Oh, look, we are in Brisbane, in Queensland, and to be honest, we're attempting to engage with Meredith to help us overcome some of this, but it's been something that we've been struggling with for a number of years up here, trying to find the appropriate person with the skill set to work with the gentleman who's in my life. So because he doesn't quite fit I guess some of the descriptions we're hearing, but it's been a struggle, and we're a bit blessed to have found this group. But as a general approach, I mean, how are you trying to put together like a nationwide registry of people who, like, say if we're looking for a psychologist who had the experience and the skill set to delve properly and support and help this man? Trying to find one is a challenge in itself. It's almost a full-time job. And I'm just wondering if there's another resource that I haven't seen yet that's available.
It's Meredith speaking, Shane. So we are all well aware that it's a big issue across Australia, that the only two services that specialise in deafblindness are based in Melbourne and Perth. We are starting to put a list together, but there's not many people. But I guess one of the things we're doing is running sessions like this and trying to build capacity and trying to support therapists who are new and learning. I'm just mindful of the time, and we can perhaps pick this conversation up again. But I'll just thank Emily again, and thank you to everyone who's asking questions as well. It's really great. There's no webinar without participants, so thank you. And we'll bring Ryan on now. And I think, Ryan, are you signing or voicing?
I think I'm voicing.
Voicing, great. That's great. Thank you. So welcome and take it away.
Hi everyone, so my name's Ryan. So for those who can see me, my sign name is Ryan, so cross your fingers, Ryan. So I'm deaf myself. I work for the National Disability Insurance Agency, so NDIA. I've worked for the agency for close to 3 years now. So I was a planner, meeting participants, including those who were deafblind, for about 2.5 years. And now I am working as a team leader in a new team that's looking after the quality of plans and checking that plans are suitable for people and making sure that the supports in their plans are meeting their needs. So, you know, that checking side of things, making sure that we're doing the right thing and supporting people where we can. So before I get started, I really want to say thank you to Michelle and Meredith for inviting me to be involved. Again, I was involved in a webinar last year, and that was a really great experience. So I'm glad that I was able to be involved again this time around. I also want to say thank you to the previous speakers. So there was Emily talking about her experience with her child, having, you know, their experience with NDIS. It's really good to hear that it was a positive experience and that you were able to have a LAC who themselves also has ushers. So that's a really good and fantastic situation to have, where you've got a mutual understanding and hopefully the best outcome possible. Of course, you mentioned to me in the chat before that, of course, some challenges, and the agency is definitely looking at what challenges are participants having, how can we address those and best support them through their planning pathway. So, you know, getting a plan, having a meeting, using their plan, all those sorts of things. And it's still a work in progress, but we're getting there. I also want to say thank you to Melanie for a really in-depth overview of a pre-planning meeting, what gets discussed, how to do some goal setting. It is one of the hardest things to do, especially goal setting, because you have to think about your life, what you want out of your life, what you'd like to achieve, and figure out how to put that into words, into writing on a plan. Most people, if you ask them, okay, tell me 5 goals that you would like to achieve in the next few years, most people will go, I'm not too sure. And it's a very similar experience for participants. And often back when I was doing planning meetings, unfortunately, I'm not doing them anymore. I do miss them a bit. But often we talked about goals at the end. That way we talked about what their needs were, talked about what supports that they would like, and then figuring out, okay, this is what you want. What goals do you need to be able to support those? So sometimes you can, in a planning meeting, ask if you would like to talk about goals at the end, because that might help. Of course, you can tap into other resources such as Able Australia, Census Australia, the two main ones for deafblindness. They can support you with your goal setting. Your allied health professionals can support you as well. And I also want to say thank you to Emily for talking about potential supports. It was very in-depth, and it's clear that you've learned a lot, given how complex the NDIS is and what can and can't be funded by the NDIS. It was a really good touch on what can and can't be included in a plan, including the different types of supports that can be included in a plan. So I was invited to talk about overview of NDIS, but the previous speakers covered so much. So I'm trying to think, what would you like from me? There was a question before. Is someone able to remind me what that question was? Because that was quite a couple of minutes ago.
Meredith speaking. So Carla asked, how long does it take, like how many meetings can you have for a pre-planning period, and is there a time limit?
Sure, thank you. So that's a great question. So usually, this is your typical scenario, usually we book an hour and a half to 2 hours for a planning meeting, but of course we need to take into consideration that doesn't always suit some people. For example, for some people who can't tolerate sitting in a meeting for quite a long time, that doesn't work for them, so you might split up the meeting into shorter meetings. Also, if you're deafblind, you've got tactile interpreters, you might get fatigued throughout the meeting. It can be quite a exhausting environment, and especially for a long time. Same for those with vision frame signing, or tactile finger spelling. We do try to accommodate communication needs and disability support needs that are required in the meeting. So I would say, depending on your circumstance, just ask, say, I don't think this meeting will be suitable for me. It's too long or too short, and just flag that and we'll be happy to accommodate. So we'll do the best that we can with that. And of course, be mindful that maybe in advance, you let the agency know. That way, if you need Auslan interpreters, you need multiple meetings split out across multiple days, or comm guides, or tactile interpreters, that we can get that arranged for you.
It's Meredith speaking again. It would be great if you could touch on the recently announced hearing services with the NDIS, and also if you could talk about early intervention and the very beginning with people newly diagnosed.
Yeah. Thanks, Meredith. All right. So the first thing to talk about is talk about the hearing services program. So this is a bit of a tricky area which has been developing over the last couple of years. So some background to that is many people would have been engaged with Australian Hearing, who have now changed their name to Hearing Australia, which some people are still trying to get their heads wrapped around that. So they were previously, or currently still are, funded through the Commonwealth Government Hearing Services Program. So this was typically funding from the Department of Health. However, when the NDIS came on board, started rolling out throughout Australia, there was the agreement between different areas of government, both federal and state, that certain disability supports will transition to the NDIS. So that included the Hearing Services Program. That meant eventually the NDIS would be responsible for paying for the same stuff that historically the Hearing Services Program paid for. So and it's a bit of a complicated space because there's different transition arrangements depending on how old you are and what type of support you're receiving from the Hearing Services Program. So at this point in time, so information current as now, if you are a participant who is under 26 years old and you're receiving supports from Hearing Australia, you will continue to receive those supports through Hearing Australia for the foreseeable future. So that won't be changing at this point in time. However, if you are over 26 years old and you're receiving support from Hearing Australia or through the Hearing Services Program, because you might be seeing or accessing that through a different audiologist, that support will then be funded in your NDIS plan from 1st of July onwards this year. So because right now, the Commonwealth Government Hearing Services Program is paying for it, if you have a plan approved now, you might have that funding included in your plan for 1st of July onwards, but you won't be able to use it yet. So that money is there to prepare you, give you that money that you need so that you can continue to see your audiologist, get your hearing aids checked up, have your maintenance, your repairs, and that sort of thing. That's a very broad overview of what's happening with that. So lots of people know that if they've been going to Hearing Australia, that, you know, they get a replacement hearing aid or hearing device it's a certain time period. Hearing Australia have their own criteria. From 1st of July onwards, for those who are 26 years old or above, you will then, if you need replacement hearing aid, money for repairs and maintenance, that will have to be included in your plan. So make sure you ask for that and flag that in your planning meeting. Is there any comments or questions about the hearing services program before I go on to early intervention? Carol? Wait for the interpreter.
Sorry. We have 2 questions. Firstly is Deborah.
Sorry, I think Carol doesn't realise the interpreter can't see. Oh, yep, okay.
Oh, sorry.
Let's go back. So from my understanding, because I think the interpreter missed the start of it, she was talking about having her meeting split in half. So she had 2 separate meetings that combined them together to discuss her overall NDIS plan. So yeah, that's great. That's great that they were able to accommodate you.
We have a question from Shane. For folks who are agency managed, could you confirm if it is possible to compartmentalise some funding into plan managed to allow access to a greater range of necessary services? If able to happen, what approach would you recommend at this to achieve this?
All right, so I'm not too sure I understand the question in full. So in what types of supports are you asking about for that?
Ryan, it's again, the gentleman who's in my life is agency managed. We're finding that we can access some support, however, they're not actually agency registered. So that then means that we've got that gap between what's possible and from either end. And I had heard that it may be possible now for an agency managed person to actually have a part of their plan managed, but I've yet to see that in reality yet. So it's only hearsay at this point.
Well, thanks, Shane. So yeah, that's a really great question. So that is possible. So for those who don't know, when you have an NDIS plan with funding in that plan, the way that you look after that money, there's 3 different ways. So you can have it agency managed or NDIA managed, which means that the NDIA looks after your money and your services that you access, the providers of those services will claim directly from your NDIS plan. The other option is plan management, which means you have like a third party. Think of it as like a bookkeeper or an accountant who just looks after that money. They don't have much other control other than you giving them an invoice and they pay it for you from your NDIS plan. So that allows you to use providers that are both NDIS registered and non-NDIS providers, meaning you can use any provider you'd like. And then there is the third option, self-management, which is basically you are responsible for managing the funding. You have access to it on the NDIS portal, so a website. You can make claims and you get the money in your bank account and you are responsible for paying for your services. So Shane, you can actually have a combination of different ways that you look after that money. So you can definitely have a combination of agency managed and plan managed. And depending on where that person's plan is, I don't know what the time frame is, but if you've got a review coming up, then you can definitely ask for different money to be arranged a different way. And it's participant choice. So whatever is your choice in terms of how you want to manage your funding. That's up to you. The only thing is for self-management, we do have to do a risk assessment. Make sure you haven't been bankrupt or insolvent in the past, that you can look after your money. But I definitely encourage you to ask for it.
Right, and is there any approach to that you would recommend, or just raise it as we've raised now?
Yep, just raise it as you raise it now. Say, for example, I would like my capacity building funding to be plan managed, but my core funding to be agency managed. It's as simple as that.
Okay, fantastic, thank you.
No problem.
Deborah has a question.
Yeah, my question is, I just recently had my hearing appointment. I was just wondering, can I use my NDIS to pay for my hearing services, like required for my hearing aid repairs, or when I get new hearing aids, etc., new batteries, stuff like that?
Sure, so that's a great question. So going back to that hearing services program discussion that we just had, at this point in time, up until the 30th of June this year, the hearing services program is responsible for paying for your hearing aids, your upgrades, your maintenance, your batteries. You might pay a little contribution. Some people pay between $30 to $60 a year to Hearing Australia or the Hearing Services Program, and they get batteries and repairs and maintenance in return. So that arrangement will continue until the 30th of June. However, 1st of July onwards, then you can use your NDIS plan to access that.
Thank you. So for my next appointment with Australian Hearing, do I need to use my NDIS funding to attend to my appointments?
It depends if your next appointment is before the 30th of June or after the 30th of June.
It will be the 30th of June. My next appointment will be probably, I have one in April just recently this year.
Yep.
My next one will probably be due in around about October, November, or around about later in the year.
Sure.
I'm having 6 months at the moment. My audiologist asked me, well, I had a choice, 12 months or 6 months.
Sure. So that sounds like it will be after the 1st of July. So I would encourage you bring a copy of your NDIS plan. You don't have to show your audiologist, but just bring a copy with you just in case. And your audiologist will be able to tell you if they need to claim from your NDIS plan. And if necessary, they'll get you to sign what we call a service agreement. It's basically just a contract outlining that they can claim money from your NDIS plan, how that they will get paid if they need to get paid.
So I had to take my plan with me to my audiologist appointment next time.
It's probably safe to do that, whether it's a physical copy or just a copy for yourself. What you really need is just a good idea of, or a way to check how much money is in your capacity building budget and what your NDIS number is and your plan dates. That way, if your audiologist needs to claim money from your plan, they'll be able to help you arrange that.
Thank you, and have a nice day and stay safe.
You too.
It's Meredith speaking. I'm just mindful of the time. So Ryan, if you could just talk briefly about the process of the family with a child who's newly diagnosed and their journey, or the process, and then we'll open it up for questions to the whole panel after that.
Sure, thanks Meredith. So the NDIS has various different ways that you can access the NDIS. So we call these pathways. So we acknowledge that various different ages, disabilities, circumstances may require a different approach, and we are constantly tweaking and adjusting and learning how we can do better to best support participants to get the supports they need. So at this point in time, for children who are between the ages of 0, so basically from birth up to 6 years old, inclusive of 6, we have a pathway called the Early Childhood Early Intervention Pathway, so ECEI pathway for short. So this is a pathway that has a tailored approach where participants, so children, they will receive multidisciplinary supports, meaning that they will get funding based on the level of disability or their condition, because some children under 6 might not have actually a diagnosed condition as yet, but they still have needs. So they will get funding that they can use to see a wide variety of allied health professionals, such as those that Emily talked about before, who can help identify that child's needs, what their supports should be put in place to build their capacity and their ability to do everything else that everyone else does. So this approach is it's like an intensive approach, because the NDIA acknowledges that in terms of milestones and the crucial time periods for children to acquire skills, language, build their capacity, it's important to get in as early as possible so that they can have the best opportunity to learn and develop and grow. So that's why we have a specific pathway for it that is a little bit different to the general pathway for participants who are 7 years old and up. That's a very broad overview. If anyone would like me to elaborate a bit more, feel free to ask.
It's Meredith speaking. That was great. Thank you, Ryan. So I'll hand over to you, Michelle, now to ask any questions that are coming through, and we will open it up to the panel. So if anybody has a question for Emily Shepherd or Melanie Robertson or Emily Macdonald or Ryan, and each of you might have something to say about the questions, but I'll hand to you, Michelle.
Thank you. We had a question from Emily Shepherd. It did for Ryan, which said, can you talk a little more about the different service providers other than Hearing Australia providing audiological services for those over 26?
Yep, I can definitely do that. So prior to the NDIS coming in, so you had the Hearing Services Program, you had Hearing Australia, or back then Australian Hearing, who provided what we call specialist hearing services. So those with complex needs, those who are children requiring early intervention, pretty intensive regular supports to make sure that they develop as best as they can. However, so for anyone under 26, their main provider, the one that you would go to, is Hearing Australia, because they're set up for that and they're able to provide a much higher level of support than other providers. However, for those who were over 26 years old, the Hearing Services Program had about, I think it was about 280 Hearing Services Program audiologists. These were not audiologists like Hearing Australia. These were audiologists like Bloom, I can't remember all the different names. Basically those private audiologists that when you go to the shops, you see those hearing aid stores, those types of shops. So basically, because Hearing Australia was set up in certain areas, but maybe some people don't like Hearing Australia, some people prefer a different audiologist, they had that choice to go to a different audiologist, and they had about 280 different options. However, after the 1st of July, you might see even more audiologist organisations pop up, as they won't have to be registered with the Hearing Services Program. Instead, they will be registered as potentially an NDIS provider.
Thank you. Melanie has a question. I'm just going to unmute it if it works.
Hi, this is a question for Ryan. So a lot of people born with deafblindness have really complex medical and care needs at various stages of their life, often when they're very little and, you know, in the first couple of years of life before they maybe stabilise, and then maybe later as they age. I noticed there's a line for nursing, funding for nursing in the kind of funding line items, and wondering kind of how this might apply to someone with congenital deafblindness, you know, when they have those really high medical needs.
All right, so this is a very big area. So historically, just for some background, historically, NDIS was very focused on funding supports that were strictly disability related. If it was something medical, in most cases at that point in time, it was the responsibility of the healthcare system, hospitals, your usual Medicare to provide. However, as a result of a group called the Disability Reform Council, who meet together regularly, they talk about changes, they talk about the government, they talk about how NDIS can improve, what things need to be changed in various different government departments and systems. So they came together, and as a result of one of their discussions, 1st of October last year, the NDIA introduced what we call disability-related health supports. So these are supports that alone you might look at it and go, well, that's very health, that's very medical. But the purpose of that is the NDIA acknowledges that some people might only have those health needs because of the specific disability that they have. So one example that I can think of in relation to deafblindness is potentially someone who is deafblind and has diabetes. So maybe they have full dual sensory loss and they communicate in tactile Auslan. If they need to have regular insulin injections, and they might not be able to do it themselves because they can't see or access their blood sugar, the reader, they can't do the injection themselves in a safe manner, then based on the person's circumstances, NDIA may consider funding nursing supports to do that for the participant and help them administer their own insulin, because that is the more safe alternative. And it's only required due to the fact that they are deafblind, because if they were not deafblind, in most cases, most people with diabetes can inject their own insulin. That's one example off the top of my head.
Thank you. Erica Webb had a question, and it said, are people who are deafblind getting enough supports and services granted in their NDIS plans, or are they having to seek a review or appeal the NDIS decision?
It's Meredith speaking. I think it would be great to hear from each of the panel members with a response to that question. So we might start with you, Emily Shepherd, if you feel like you have received enough for your son.
Thanks, Meredith. Yes, definitely for my son we have had adequate support, but I think that that came down to the relationship that I had with the LAC, who really understood the condition. But I know that that is few and far between. I do know that a lot of our families do struggle with the understanding of the dual sensory loss, and many have had to go to reviews for more support. It seems to be that those supports were around access to interpreters for those with Auslan as their first language who have struggled the most. But I do think that it is slowly improving. There is more and more awareness from the NDIS about the needs of our community. But no, that it's not perfect, and yes, many do have reviews, but I think that they are getting looked at and reviewed more more quickly at the moment. So yeah, it's not a perfect system, but we're getting there slowly.
Meredith, that's great to hear. Thanks, Emily. And Melanie, what's your perspective on that question about the adequacy of plans generally for people with deafblindness?
Right, just unmuting. Again, yeah, like Emily, I think it's very mixed. So if a family is very involved with their services and that service has a good understanding of deafblindness, then they can help the family think about things that they might not have thought about already, and the family can do likewise for the therapist, and they can prepare a nice report with lots of assessment information and rationale to get the supports they need. Where we've had reviews, they've been over issues, I guess, with congenital deafblindness. You have really unique communication needs, and sometimes the families sort of, really struggle to support those communication needs. So we try and bring in people who already have those skills to support the family, to support the child, and also support the child in social situations as well, with regard to their communication and development of communication, and their orientation, mobility skills, getting around from, you know, A to B. So we might use support workers to help build those skills as well. And sometimes we might really not get an ideal amount of support work perhaps to support, you know, to support that need, but, you know, with review and advocacy, we might get success there. The other aspect is also that it can be quite a difficult area for support workers to work in, and they need a lot of skills to do it and to stay there, and to stay in that role. So, and to feel competent in that role. So they need a lot of training support as well. And so sometimes we will try and work that into the individual's funding package, so that the people working around that child get specific upskilling to continue to support them. Yeah, so that's probably my two bits worth there.
Thanks, Melanie. It's Meredith, and I would echo exactly what you've said. It's true for adults as well. I see a lot of adults with congenital deafblindness, and that need for training support staff around the individual is there's a really big need there, and I think that hasn't been well addressed in a lot of plans that I'm aware of. So yeah, that need for ongoing training of staff working with the child or the adult. Emily Macdonald, what's your perspective on the clients that you've been working with and the adequacy of their plans?
Yes, I think getting the plan in the first place and that being adequate, that's definitely getting better. The thing that a lot of the people I work with struggle with is the if you don't use it, you lose it model, where they might have had issue finding the right fit or finding the right supports, and then subsequently those supports not being repeated in another plan because they weren't used in the previous plan.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Ryan, your perspective on that?
So first, addressing what Melanie has said about you know, making the most of the resources that you have. So I do want to reiterate that in a planning meeting, you can always bring any support person that you feel that you want involved in that meeting. Whatever you need in your planning meeting to support you through that process, you do what best fits you. So if you need to bring someone like an advocate or a family friend who can help you through that process, I encourage it, and so does the agency. So around I'm just double checking the question. So it was around reviews and whether or not deafblind people are getting the supports that they need in their plan. So it's a bit tricky for me to comment because I'm not too sure about what percentage of participants with deafblindness end up having a review of their plan. I can say, however, that deafblindness, it is a very unique disability type where there can be various different causes. As you know, you have ushers, you have a few other different reasons. You have people who are impacted in different ways and have various different communication methods. So, and that's very evident. You've got deafblind people who are oral, deafblind people who can hear. You've got a bit of both or full total sensory loss. You've got tactile Auslan, visual frame, finger spelling, you've got everything. So it is a very complex disability, and it can be quite tricky to really understand it as a whole. And that's why I do really want to reiterate that it's important and helpful to, you know, collect all the information you need, talk about how your disability impacts you individually. That's the whole point of NDIS, that it's an individual approach. So you tell your story, and we will try to figure out how can we best support you with the right funds in your plan. Recently, I think it was last year, off the top of my head, the agency did link in with various different peak bodies that represent different disabilities. So I do know that we linked in with Deafblind Australia, and they made a few resources that are now available within the agency for planners, LACs to refer to. And these really help. Of course, these are a very overview because, again, going back to the complexity of deafblindness, but the resources that we have and that you have are growing, and make the most of all of that.
Great, Thank you, Ryan. It's Meredith speaking. We've probably got time for just one more question if all the speakers respond. Are there any final questions? And you can direct it to a particular speaker or the whole panel.
Sorry, I'm just going to unmute you. There you go, Emily.
Hi, speaking. Ryan, I had a question for you in regards to training for parents and carers. What is deemed reasonable and necessary? You know, lots of our parents are thrown into this world with zero understanding of the needs of hearing impaired or vision impaired, but the combination as well. What is deemed necessary, and what might be able to be claimed through an NDIS to build capacity with parents and carers?
Sure, that's a fantastic question, and it's really hard to give a blanket answer to that because reasonable and necessary, I have to say, it depends on the participant, depends on the family circumstances. What needs does the family have? What needs does the participant have? My head's already thinking about what if the child uses tactile Auslan and the parents are struggling with that, so we may potentially find it reasonable and necessary to provide Auslan training, or we might provide training for parents to understand how best to implement therapies and skill development within their home in a way that's accessible for their child. Like, there's so many different ways that we can approach this. And all I can really say is that just speak with your therapists. They're the ones who are qualified to identify what needs to be funded in the participant's plan in relation to training and enabling all the people around that participant to best support the participant, taking into account the individual needs. And that evidence, that's the key thing about the NDIS. If you've got the evidence for it to back you up, then that gives us the best information that we need to be able to determine if it is reasonable and necessary.
Thank you. Deborah has got one more question.
Okay,
I just had a comment this time to Meredith. Meredith, I just had a comment about your Thai webinar. It's very interesting. I really like the way how it works today. I have to go very soon because I'm going to go have my dinner and get ready for my Toastmasters because I'm preparing to do my speech very shortly.
It's Meredith speaking, Deb. Thank you for that feedback. We really appreciate it. It's good to know that it was valuable and useful for you, and good luck with your speech.
And I have to go have my birthday tea very shortly.
Okay, thank you for joining us this evening. We might wrap it up there. I just did have a couple of things to say. So one, on your question, Shane, I know Ryan spoke about people who use all those different communication methods, but I'm aware that the man that you're working with has very limited and is very challenged with his communication. And I think people with congenital deafblindness who are deafblind from birth, developing communication is a major challenge. And there's a lot of adults out there who do need more services. So I'm really pleased to let everybody know that this project that has funded this webinar this evening is finishing up. We've got another 2 webinars to go. So we hope you'll join us for those. But the project that is starting up there's a strong focus on congenital deafblindness because we do recognise this is an area that hasn't been as well addressed. So there will be more training and resources being developed. So we are hoping that will start to improve the services being provided for that group. We recognise there's an unmet need out there, as you've identified, Shane. So do keep an eye on the Deafblind Information Australia website and also on the Deafblind Information Facebook page, which is where we would put information about new resources that are going on the website or training that's coming up. So yeah, there's just 3 minutes to go. We could, if there's any very last questions, Otherwise, I would just like to thank the speakers. It's been a great session, really good diversity of perspectives and a wealth of knowledge there. So thank you so much for your time this evening, Emily Shepherd, Melanie Robertson, Emily Macdonald and Ryan Malonda. I'm glad that you'll be on our next webinar. Ryan, you're always a wealth of information, so we really appreciate having that NDIA perspective and having someone who does know all those tricky questions if we don't know the answers. So thanks again to everyone who's participated. Thank you to the interpreters and the captioner, Lee, and thanks a lot, Michelle, for doing all that work in the background.
And thank you, Meredith.
Yeah, thanks, Meredith.
Meredith.
Welcome. I guess if you have questions for the presenters, you can email Michelle or myself, and we can forward them on. But yes, have a good evening, everybody, and thanks for attending.
Thank you.
Right.